Imagine walking through a desert with no water bottle. The sun is above you. The ground is dry. There is no river in sight. No road. No sign. No GPS telling you where the nearest water source is. And you have no idea how far you need to walk. For a modern person, this could become a disaster very quickly. But ancient humans survived in some of the world's harshest dry environments. So how did they find water? The first thing you need to understand is that deserts are not completely empty. Even the driest landscapes contain clues. The problem is learning how to read them. Ancient humans could observe the environment around them. Plants could provide clues. Animals could provide clues. The shape of the land could provide clues. Even tiny changes in the soil could matter. You might look across a desert and see nothing. An experienced hunter-gatherer could see a potential water source. One of the most important clues was vegetation. Plants need water. And in a dry landscape, unusual vegetation can be a signal. A patch of greener plants could indicate that water was available somewhere below the surface. Trees growing in an otherwise barren landscape could be especially important. Certain plants also tend to grow near groundwater or seasonal water sources. Ancient people did not need to understand groundwater geology in the modern scientific sense. They only needed to recognize patterns. If a certain plant repeatedly appeared near water, remembering that connection could save your life. And this knowledge could be passed down. Parents could teach children which plants indicated water. Older members of a group could remember where water had been found during previous journeys. The desert could become a map written in living things. But plants were not the only clues. Animals were even more useful. Every animal needs water. So where animals go can reveal where water might be. Birds can be particularly valuable. If you saw birds repeatedly flying toward the same area, that could indicate vegetation or water nearby. Animal tracks could also tell a story. A line of fresh tracks moving toward a particular location could suggest that animals were traveling there regularly. And if many different animals were using the same area, something important might be attracting them. Water. Of course, following animals was not a guarantee. Animals can travel long distances, and some species can survive for surprisingly long periods without drinking. So experienced humans needed to combine clues rather than trust a single sign. That is the important difference. Finding water was not necessarily about one magical trick. It was about observation. You watched. You remembered. You compared. And you learned. The landscape itself could also reveal hidden water. Deserts often contain dry riverbeds. Today, you might see nothing but sand, gravel, and rocks. But during seasonal rainfall, these channels could carry enormous amounts of water. The water might disappear quickly, yet some could remain underground. A dry riverbed could therefore be more than an empty path. It could be a clue. Ancient people could learn which valleys flooded after rain, which channels held water longer, and where pools tended to form. Rock formations could also collect rainwater. Small depressions in stone could hold water after storms. Caves and rock shelters could sometimes provide access to moisture. And certain geological areas could make groundwater easier to reach. This becomes especially important because desert water does not always sit on the surface. Sometimes it is underground, and humans learn to access it. People could dig into soft ground near known water sources. They could deepen natural depressions. They could collect water from shallow groundwater. Later societies developed increasingly sophisticated wells and water systems. But the basic principle was much older. If water disappeared from the surface, you could look beneath it. Rain was another opportunity. A desert can remain dry for long periods. Then a storm arrives. Water rushes across the landscape. Most of it may disappear quickly, but if you know the terrain, you can predict where some of that water will collect. Rock basins, low areas, depressions, dry channels, natural pools. Knowing these places could turn a sudden storm into a temporary water supply. The challenge was timing. You might have only a short window. A pool could evaporate. A muddy water source could disappear. And if you arrived too late, you might find nothing. This is why memory became so important. Imagine traveling through the same desert with your group. You remember a place where water appeared after heavy rain. You remember a particular tree. a distinctive rock, a valley, a dry stream bed. These landmarks could become part of your mental map. You did not need a GPS. You carried the map in your memory, and that knowledge could be more valuable than almost anything else you owned. Because in a desert, water determines how far you can travel. It determines where you can camp. It determines how long you can survive. And it influences where animals and plants can exist. Water also had to be carried. Finding a water source was only half the problem. You needed to transport enough of it to reach the next source. Ancient humans used containers made from materials available in their environments. Animal skins could be used as containers. Hollowed materials could store liquids. Later, pottery provided another major advantage. But even before advanced containers existed, people had ways of transporting water. The amount you could carry placed limits on your movement. This meant that travel routes were often connected to reliable water sources. A group could move from one known source to another. The desert was not crossed randomly. It was navigated through a network of opportunities. And sometimes, those opportunities were extremely far apart. This made mistakes dangerous. If you expected water at a particular location and found none, the consequences could be serious. You could become dehydrated. Your body would lose water through sweat and breathing. Your ability to think clearly could decline. Your ability to travel could disappear. And eventually, dehydration could become fatal. This is why knowledge mattered so much. One generation learned from the previous generation. A successful journey created information. A dangerous mistake created information too. People learned which places were reliable, which were seasonal, which had become dry, and which should be avoided. Over many generations, this environmental knowledge could become incredibly detailed. You might know the desert not as a giant empty space, but as a landscape filled with invisible connections. This hill leads toward a valley. That valley collects rain. That plant grows near shallow groundwater. Those animals gather near a seasonal pool. That rock formation holds water after storms. And somewhere beyond it is another reliable source. To a person without this knowledge, the desert could look impossible. To someone who understood it, the desert became readable. But there is something else worth remembering. Ancient humans did not necessarily live in deserts because they wanted to. Environmental conditions changed. Climate changed. Water sources shifted. Groups moved. Some landscapes that are extremely dry today were wetter in the past. So prehistoric humans sometimes occupied environments that were very different from what we see now. They adapted as conditions changed. And when water became scarce, their ability to find and conserve it became even more important. Imagine standing in the desert thousands of years ago. Your group is tired. The sun is beginning to drop. Your water supply is getting low. You look across the landscape. There is no river, no lake, nothing obvious. Then someone notices a particular plant growing where almost nothing else is green. The group changes direction. You walk toward it. The ground becomes slightly different. You find a depression. Maybe there is water. Maybe there is only damp soil. You dig. And eventually, moisture appears. A small amount, but enough. Suddenly, the landscape that looked completely lifeless has given you what you need. Water. That moment could determine whether the journey continued. For ancient humans, finding water was not just a useful skill. It was one of the foundations of survival. They could not control the desert. They could not make rain appear. They could not simply order water to be delivered. They had to observe, remember, adapt, and pass knowledge forward. The desert was never truly empty. It was full of clues. The challenge was learning how to see them. So the next time you see a completely dry landscape and wonder how anyone could survive there, remember this. Ancient humans were not walking blindly through the desert. They were reading it. A plant, a track, a valley, a rock, a dry riverbed, a patch of unusual soil. Each could tell a story, and sometimes, if you knew how to listen, the desert itself could tell you where to find water. If you enjoyed discovering how ancient humans solved problems without modern technology, subscribe to Primal Questions. Because sometimes, the most important survival tool was not something you carried. It was what you knew.